Hello everyone. We are right now in our fifth last podcast of European Solidarity Corps project Silence Sides Violence, which spreads the awareness about violence, its forms, harm from different perspectives. And today we have our guest Polina. Hello.
Hi everyone.
Firstly, I'll ask you to introduce yourself to our podcast listeners. Like, what is your job and role in it, and in general, how you're related to domestic violence, let's say.
Yes, so my name is Polina and I was born and raised in Kazakhstan actually, but moved to Lithuania to study in 2017, and now I am a project manager at Active Youth, working in the human team, which specializes in human rights related topics, including fighting violence against women and supporting people with disabilities, anti-human trafficking prevention, awareness raising, ex-offender support, and other topics. And before starting my professional journey at Active Youth, I worked at the network of NGOs called WAVE, and it stands for Women Against Violence Europe. And WAVE is working towards the prevention and protection of women and children from violence, building the capacity of its, I think it's 160 members across Europe, advocating for better legislation, conducting research, and different raising awareness campaigns on the topics of violence against women and girls. So this is my expertise, and yeah, right now I am at Active Youth.
That's very nice, and we are very happy to have you today in our podcast. And can you please elaborate a bit on the wave? So it's working in all the Europe, like all the European Union countries. It's just like based in one. Like, how does it work in general?
Yeah, so WAVE is based in Austria. In Vienna specifically is the office, but it's the umbrella organization for many different organizations. It's like a networking organization, and it focuses on connecting organization not just across the European Union, but also in the entirety of Europe. So, for example, countries such as Serbia or Moldova or Georgia or Ukraine, they would also be included in the network. And the way it works, you are an organization that works with women or supports women. So you apply to become a member, and then you are able to work together to collaborate and work on different projects. And there's a very democratic systems of elections, so you're actually able to choose a organization's president. So the office where I was working at is just specializes on administrative functions and carrying out the projects and initiatives, not the decision making part, if that makes sense. But that's kind of the organization and the idea behind it.
Seems very interesting. And do you think right now what you gain in that organization is related to the work that you do next youth?
It's actually a very interesting story of how Active You found me. It was actually through Wave, sort of, because right after I've graduated from university in Lithuania in 2021, I started working at Wave, and one of my classmates started working at Active Youth. And she reached out to me saying, like, hey, I know you're working for an organization that specializes in women's rights, and we're having this project called a Safe Space where we are discussing violence against women, and maybe you can come and participate in the workshop as a speaker. And this is how I first encountered Active Youth, actually, through my expertise via Wave. So yeah, that was the story. So I feel like, yeah, definitely skills that I obtained at the job are helping me right now being a project manager. And I can definitely see how a lot of the tasks that I've been working on, a lot of the topics I've been discussing are helping me currently, especially as, like I said, I'm working in the human team, specifically focusing on human rights related topics, and violence against women is a big one for the team.
True, and as you said, I mean, like human rights in general are quite related to the violence because if you don't have, let's say, enough rights or there is not enough legislation laws regarding that, it's then that's like quite a big issue. What causes it? And in general, as it's written in association page of Active Youth, the mission is to create opportunities for youth and sustainable positive impact on how we treat our planet, health, vulnerable people, and online communities. So you already mentioned you work with the project related to human rights, but could you please tell projects that are you working with to help to create a positive impact on the vulnerable groups or online communities regarding the human rights?
Yes. I'm currently working on three different projects, and one of the projects is called Youth Urban Action, and its goal is to revolutionize urban spaces in a way and make them more accessible for people with disabilities, for example. And actually, one of the latest project results was the staging of an inclusive performance in the streets near the Arc of Triumph in Barcelona. So it's pretty interesting. And the other project is AR for youth. And this project is a combination of technology, culture, and education. And we're focusing on preserving the cultural heritage of the project partners, including Lithuania, through the use of augmented reality, while also creating a methodology and study kit for the use of this technology, which can be later used for education needs. And actually, the third project is my baby because um, Active Youth is the leading organization in this project, making me a leading project manager, and it's called They Have a Name. And this is an anti human trafficking initiative, and it's aimed at strengthening collaboration, raising awareness, and sharing best practices among Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonian organizations working in the field. And this project is so great because it strives to address all types of human trafficking, and it includes, for example, sexual exploitation, and this disproportionately affects women. And I'm especially excited about the upcoming online exhibition, actually, that will take place in May 2023. So stay tuned for that. And in general, I feel like in my work, I really love the ability to use creative tools from various disciplines. For example, performance art, like in the case of Youth Urban Action, or technology, or storytelling, and other techniques and tools, because I really love the saying that I once heard during one of the training courses, actually, and it was like, do you think people are more likely to change their attitudes or their beliefs after reading a research paper, or actually by actively engaging with these issues through some creative means? And it was just like a simple question, but it really resonated with me, and I totally agree with it. And so I try to promote creative activism in my work, and through the projects you can see that they're rather creative and incorporate different ideas and methodologies, but they're all human rights related as well.
True. So there are three different and very interesting, and I would say also bringing a big value project that you're working with that I'm very actually happy to hear about. Um, and you said about the human trafficking exhibition in 2023. So what this exhibition is going to be about and where it's going to happen?
Yeah, so we are still in the process of making it and thinking about how to make it, but it's a very exciting process because it allows us to sort of see how we can really make the most impact, how we can make sure the most people hear about the problem of human trafficking, but at the same time that would be engaging, and at the same time it would leave some kind of impact on them, so it wouldn't be just like an informational piece or like statistics or something like that, so it is a bit more engaging. And for now we're considering maybe doing something like a interactive hike that would include augmented reality, so people would be able to walk and maybe scan a QR code and see, hear a story of a human trafficking victim. And it kind of will be like a path that would allow people to walk in the shoes of the survivors. So it's a very metaphorical idea as well, but at the same time, it's creative and it has a potential of engaging a lot of people, while it's quite a simple idea, right? To just make people walk and make people listen. So yeah, this is something we're thinking about, but of course it's all in the making since there's still quite some time before the project is due, the output is due specifically. But I love just the idea of even thinking about the ways um, to promote social topics like that, because it can really vary and it can really be a huge opportunity for to express your creative ideas while being very impactful.
True, and it definitely sounds quite engaging to walk and listen to the stories. I would personally would really love to participate in this kind of event.
Good.
Um, true, so that sounds very engaging, as I said. But in general, in this project, do you focus more on European countries, or did you do the research about Lithuania as well, like the human trafficking, let's say statistics, or it's more in general about human trafficking in Europe?
Yeah, actually, we were researching a lot about the state of human trafficking in Lithuania. And that's actually an amazing question because we're going to publish our final research, which would be like an e-booklet report of the expert groups on trafficking in human beings. So, if you're interested to learn more about it, you can follow Active View social media pages. And in January, we are going to publish the e-booklet with more detailed statistics. But yes, definitely in Lithuania, what was one of the more interesting pieces of information that we've learned was that youth, actually, young people, are disproportionately affected by trafficking, which wasn't something we expected mm, when we just started working on the research. But yeah, that was the case. And what else interesting I can tell you? The problem in different countries, sorry, and another interesting piece of information I can tell you is that in Lithuania, the issue of human trafficking is rather balanced. That means more, ugh, sorry, it's hard to talk about statistics in a very interesting way. But what else I can tell you is that in Lithuania, if you are looking at the human trafficking problem from the gender perspective, the issue is rather balanced. Because, for example, in 2021, there were more men affected by trafficking than women, whereas in 2020, more women than men. And the while in 2018 it was almost the same, so it's more or less equal. And that's kind of interesting because I feel like when a lot of people are thinking of human trafficking, they're thinking of women primarily, while men are actually affected as well, just in a different type of trafficking. But in Lithuania, sexual exploitation and labor exploitation are the two most prevalent types of trafficking. And yeah, we are going to be talking in more detail about the statistics related to all three Baltic states in the research. So please check it out, read it, and see if you will learn something new from it.
Oh, for sure, I think it would be very nice to read more about it, because in general, I would say like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia have pretty similar experience, but if you compare it, let's say Lithuania with these two countries, do you think Lithuania has like, let's say, a better statistics? Like, is it like better in a way that there's like less human trafficking, or this kind of research was not made yet?
We didn't compare, I mean, if you compare the numbers, I feel like it's
Hmm.
more or less the same.
Okay.
I would say Latvia has significantly more human trafficking survivors, and especially labor exploitation related. For them, men are the most prevalent survivor category because of the labor exploitation. Like in 2021, there were 53 survivors of trafficking related to labor exploitation, which is rather big, while in Lithuania it ranges from 16 to 15 to 7 to 9. So yeah, I would say that Latvia definitely l- has the most survivors based on our research, while Lithuania is doing a little bit better from that perspective. Yeah, in terms of Estonia, Estonia is reporting a lot more children involved in trafficking. So that's another category of trafficking that is rather prevalent in Estonia, while in Lithuania, not as much. So yeah, there are some significant differences, but overall, that's the picture.
Okay, so but when you gather the stories, you said like about the hike and sharing the stories with the QR codes. Have you already started to collect the stories from the people who experience human trafficking?
No, no,
Because
no.
okay, because in our project we are also collecting the stories from women who experience violence, and I would say it's quite hard to find them. And in every podcast, we were saying that it's basically very, very important to speak about violence. And our project name is Silence Hides Violence. So it's basically about promoting to speak more loudly about the violence because if you don't speak, it's hard to actually face that it's even a problem. But
Hmm.
yes, I think it's going to be very hard to find the stories, in my point of view. But I would say it would be so interesting to hear them.
We are very lucky because of our partners, because we are partnering with human trafficking expert organizations who work with survivors directly. And so as they are providing psychological consultations and training to the survivors, they are constantly in contact with them. So for them, I feel like it will be easier to get some testimonies, I guess, about their experiences of some sorts. Whereas as active youth, we don't directly specialize in human trafficking. For us alone, it would be a bit more difficult. But luckily, our partners are a bit more suitable for finding the stories.
Yeah, that's true. If you work directly with a specific group of people, it's a lot easier to find it. And I think it would definitely help a lot if you have partners like that. So that's great for you, for sure. And I actually didn't even know that they do the trainings for the people who experience human trafficking, but I'm sure as well it's very needed that's like specialized in the initiatives like that. So it's very nice to hear. And we already talked about the hike and the stories, but in general, as working in the NGO, what initiatives do you think NGOs and associations can create to inspire women and, in general, all the people who experience violence to speak about it? Well, let's say violence and human trafficking.
I was kind of more thinking about violence against women when
Okay,
thinking about the question. I kind of want to deconstruct the question, I feel like. So instead of coming up with like a particular initiative, I guess I want to maybe discuss the main components, I believe, of a great initiative. And I feel like when designing a very comprehensive and well-rounded project, it's very important to focus on better legislation, improving support systems, and empowerment. I feel like these are the main three categories. Because if there are no laws protecting survivors of violence, then nothing will empower a significant number of people to speak up, right? For example, in my home country, in Kazakhstan, we excluded domestic violence from the Criminal Code of Justice in 2017, which is terrible. And it means that it got much harder for survivors, which are mostly women in the case of my country, to report domestic violence. And it's so hard to stand up and speak up from the legal standpoint when you're not protected. And you, as an NGO or like as an individual that wants to empower people to speak up, you also need to be careful about suggesting people to do something that might not be legal or that might harm them at the end from a legal standpoint. So advocating for better legislation is very, very important for all of the other initiatives. And the other key factor, as I said, was to provide a survivor with a strong support system to let them know that they're not alone and explain all the rights and possibilities, like shelters or subsidies, government subsidies, or free therapy sessions, or anything else that they might have, because people are more likely to speak up against violence when they have someone else to rely on, apart from the abuser, because power dynamic is a big part of abuse and a big part of violence. So raising awareness about support systems and improving support systems for women is a big, or for survivors in general, is a big part of a good initiative. And also empowerment, like I said, because it's important to make survivors feel strong and powerful and capable. Because again, abusers often try to diminish the survivor, to destroy their character, to make them feel like they deserve to be abused, you know? And so an effective initiative should advocate for better laws, raise awareness among the general public regarding the support services, and improve support services, and empower people to have a voice in the first place. Because if you don't have a voice, then you will never be able to speak up, even if you have everyone else supporting you. So I feel like a good project should be able to cover at least a portion of three of these components, or maybe focus on the one that is lacking. Like in my country, the legal part is really lacking. So focusing on that is very, very important before moving on. So yeah, this is sort of what I had in mind.
Sure, I definitely agree with you with all the three components. And definitely it's very important to empower the people who speak. And also, I think in Lithuania, it's a big issue that society still blames the victim, not the perpetrator. I'm not sure if that's also perpetrator, not the person
Mhm.
who is harming the other. And in general, like there is the statistics that 8 of 10 people believe that if the woman is experiencing violence, she's the one who provoked the violence.
Mhm.
So I believe it's quite hard to speak in the environment like that when all the other or the majority of other society members is blaming you, that you are the one who basically caused this kind of issue in the family. So definitely the initiatives which spread the awareness about violence are very important, because at least if like 2 people out of 100 can actually listen and hear about the problem, that they might change their like close community, and this and a new way of thinking can spread to all also other society members. But of
Yeah, yeah,
course,
exactly. Because the more you normalize not normalizing violence, the easier and better it is to fight the problem. Because right now it's very normal to hear your neighbors fight and hear people scream, and you're like, well, it's none of my business. That's the family business. And it's the same when it comes to sometimes police come into the house when the domestic violence was reported, and people would say, well, can't you just discuss it within the family? Why do you have to involve us? What are we going to do? So it's often this sort of fear and stigma around discussing violence in the family, and discussing, because, violence, when we think of violence, at least when I used to think about violence, I'm like, okay, it's going to be just some random guy. I'm be walking in the street and he's going to do something to me. I'm really scared of that. But in reality, violence is something that is committed by a person that normally is some kind of a relative, a friend, or a partner to the survivor. So survivor normally knows the perpetrator, which is kind of crazy, but it is all because it's kind of not what we choose to talk about when it comes down to violence. We choose to avoid the subject and believe that no, violence is just something that is outside of the home, that is just like this gangs and crime out there, but not really something that takes place actually right next to us. And I feel like talking about it and talking about just the fact that this is how it normally goes may shock some people. I feel like being shocked is good sometimes, especially when you're using facts.
oh, definitely. And as you said, some people are saying that violence can happen just in the street. And then maybe they imagine that abusers should look a certain way, but it's also not true at all, because the person can be so good at manipulating and actually showing the good side of the society, but such a different side on the like inside the family.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also, I think, very important to say that even if it doesn't look from the outside that the person is doing something wrong, for instance, the psychological manipulation and psychological form of violence can be so hidden and it's actually so hard to prove it. But as we had the podcast with the policeman, he said that violence is never justified. So I think that's also what we should do in the society, like never justify the violence. Never say that, oh, maybe just like once and maybe you provoked it. No, even if it's just once, it was from a violence. So it means we need
Mm-hmm.
to take action for it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because it's very, very, to me at least, it's very hard sometimes to talk to older generation regarding this topic. Because I remember this literally happened to me. It was in Riga, Latvia. I was getting a haircut, and a hairdresser was talkative, and she was asking me where I was working at, and I was working at Wave at the moment, and I was like, yeah, I'm doing this sort of social work. And she's like, oh, that's very nice, it's very good. It's so sad that this problem exists, but I'm so happy that it would never happen to me because I'm not even trying to, provoke my man to do that to me. And I'm like, girl, no, this is the opposite exactly of what we're trying to convey with our work. But it's really, really common. It's kind of sort of like us and them mentality, because it makes you feel like, okay, if I'm not one of them, therefore they were doing something wrong. But then it happens to you, you want to be silent about it, right? Because you don't want to be one of them. You don't want to appear as if you have done something wrong, or you're wrong, or something's wrong with your family. It's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And yeah, that's a big problem, but this is what's happening. These are the talking points of the majority of people still.
Oh, for sure. And also, as I mentioned, like as we talk with the policeman, there's just like certain group of people who say, "Oh, what other people are going to think about me or my family," and I will not speak about it because my role in the society is more important than like the problems that are happening. And it's also quite a big issue, but for this reason, people should not forget that there is anonymous forms. All the people don't necessarily need to know about your problem, but even if they know, it's still better to solve the problems and not to just keep them inside the family. Because in Lithuania, we still have this perspective that, oh, it's better to keep all the problems inside the family. But no, sometimes you actually need
Hmm.
to speak about it. But what I'm actually happy that there's less abuse for the children in Lithuania, as like there are like less reports at least. So people are actually learning that there are different techniques how to teach a child than to punch or use any physical harm, you know? So I think this thing is changing and that's like a positive news in Lithuania.
Hmm. Definitely, I feel like that's very important. I remember, based on my experience in Kazakhstan, we have it's a very patriarchal culture, and it's a very much man-centered culture as well. So a woman has her own place in the household, etc. In the traditional families, at least. But a child is also often beaten or somehow explained what they should or shouldn't be doing in a rather angry tone, or in a sort of verbal violence tone. And yeah, it's very hard to see, and it definitely impacts the way people treat others, the way people treat their own family members later on in life when they are old enough to have their own families. So yeah, breaking the cycle of violence is very important, and I'm very happy that it's improving in Lithuania, particularly.
But do you think it's improving in Kazakhstan or is it still staying the same?
It's really hard to know because it's a very, very big country. And so maybe if it is getting better in the bigger cities, you never really know what is going on in the smaller cities. And it's one of those problems that is really hard to report. Let's say you're a child and you're being beaten, and everyone is telling you that this is normal, that this is the way you're going to grow as a good person, and this is the way everyone else has been raised, so you don't really know that you should be reporting something like that, and you live in a small town and no one talks about it. So there's no way to even have statistics about that because people may as well be abused but not reporting anything like that at all. And that's a big problem. So I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement in our case, but breaking the cycle of violence is important. And I'm happy you've mentioned that because, yeah, that's one of the ways to start teaching children and young boys that this is not a way to treat another person in the family or even another being in the family, right? Like that includes animal violence and in general all kinds of other acts of violence that you can see within the family.
Well, of course, because these kind of form or acts of violence, I think, is also goes through the generations. And we talked with Margarita in another podcast that basically, that people know about the trauma that goes like from the war, but also quite the same trauma goes through the generations with the form of violence. Basically, if you experience violence, but even if you haven't experienced it directly, but your mother or father has experienced it, you kind of have it in yourself as a form, like that kind of pain. So it's actually also a very interesting topic because to break through is very, very hard, but it's so important because your children might also have, an impact if you don't break the stigma, even if they haven't experienced it directly. So definitely the generational violence is also a very interesting and very important topic to speak about. And definitely this form of pain can also run through the pets or any other human being, as you mentioned. Doesn't have to necessarily be family member, but definitely I believe all of your projects adds up to raising the awareness, and human trafficking is also a big part of it. So I think as we're going to an end, I would ask you the question, how do you think everyone can contribute to breaking through the stigma of violence? Like all of us personally, even like with the smallest steps. What do you think it could be?
Yeah, so I feel like it's very important to differentiate and to teach yourself and to maybe teach others how to differentiate between good and bad influence, if it makes sense. Because right now, with Andrew Tate and other far right, very much patriarchal figures being on the rise, and being very popular among young people, and this sort of alpha culture and very much toxic masculinity based culture is becoming more and more popular among very young children, actually. It's so important to be able to differentiate between a piece of media or a piece of information or a persona that is spreading hate and that is maybe spreading something that is more harmful than good. And I feel like being able to spread the word about positive masculinity figures or to actively go against the above mentioned problematic, I would say, people and messages is already very important. Because I feel like, especially the way it is done with younger people, if something is very cringy, if something is very not cool, let's say, it's going to not be popular and it's not going to be that influential. While comparing it to something that is more popular and more influential and more impactful. So I feel like just making sure that the information you're consuming is not hateful and consuming a bit more information that is challenging your views, that is always very good. And trying to engage with different people from different backgrounds, that's also important because if you are simply consuming one type of content or engaging with people who just believe in one exact thing, you don't really know what is on the opposite end and you don't know how to communicate and you don't know what problems people might be having or how your problems uh, are in comparison to the other people's problems. So just having this sort of fuller picture of the world is always very helpful and understanding what you stand by and just being kind to other people and trying to find positive influences that will be positive not only to you but to other people around you is always very, very good. And I feel like having this kind of culture and having this kind of mentality is always very helpful when it comes to empowering other people to speak up about their problems, because they would feel much more confident and comfortable voicing their concerns with a person who is a bit more open-minded rather than a person who is known to engage with extremist communities or extremist points of views, or um, something that is a bit more related to spreading hate rather than constructive dialogue among groups. So yeah, I feel like that's really important. Improving the state of culture and the information presented to people and to young people especially, I think that's very good. And empowering people around you. For example, my mom would always be like, oh, you have so much time, you're reading all these books, that's so interesting, I never have time, I never would have even understood what is written there, blah blah blah. And so now I'm always trying to like recommend her books and be like, let's read it together, or maybe let's have a discussion, just sort of empowering her to feel better, that she's smart, that she's capable of understanding it, helping her a little bit with chores so she has more time to do things for herself. Just doing this kind of little steps to people around you so that they feel a bit more empowered and that they feel more encouraged to speak up and talk about different topics. And because a lot of people are scared of social topics, of political topics. They feel like, oh no, I don't understand anything, or they don't connect the dots that well. That okay, violence is actually related to patriarchy, and this is related to these ideals of masculinity, and this how it affects different groups. Like just making sure people around you are empowered and that they feel comfortable around you and that they feel good being with you because you are supportive and because you are listening to them genuinely. So I feel like these are just the simple things that everyone can do, empower people around themselves to speak up, because maybe this person would be encouraged to speak just to you for the very first time about something. And then that might help them open up to others, and then people will be speaking up more in general.
True, I definitely agree with you that we need to speak kindly to each other and then be able to create a safe environment that people feel heard and empowered to share their stories. So I wanted to thank you very much for participating in today's podcast. I hope listeners will enjoy it and good luck with your future projects.
Yes, thank you so much. And don't forget to check out Active Youth social media, because we'll be posting the research and we will be announcing the online exhibition, which you will be able to participate in or to read. So that's a great way to start engaging with social topics and learning more about different forms of violence. Thank you so much for inviting me.
True, and thank you for the invitation. So goodbye, have a great day.
Bye.